Hi, Roger Linn here. In this video, I'm going to talk about LinnStrument's many hidden settings. These are settings that aren't obvious and are accessed only by holding a button down or some other means. They are all described in the panel settings page, but I thought by showing them to you, there might be one or two that you weren't aware of and might find useful. So here goes. Okay, starting over on the left side, the first trick is to hold to press the purse split settings and global settings buttons at the same time. And this is a shortcut to entering sleep mode, which is normally entered by the global setting in the power MIDI column, sleep. And then just to wake it up, press any key and you're back to normal operation. This reduces the power because all the LEDs are off, so it's a nice way to turn it off at night without having to unplug it. And it'll take very, very little power without the lights on. So let's see, the next thing is, it's important to note that all of these 8 control buttons are momentary or toggle, depending on how long you hold them. So for example, if I quickly tap purse split settings, and I tap it again, it's toggle. But if I hold it for more than 1/2 second, it is momentary. And I can adjust things while I'm holding it and then take it off. So that sometimes saves you a little bit of time in live performance. The next thing is the split button, which is normally used to edit the split or exit the split. If you tap it twice, it changes the entire playing surface to the opposite split's MIDI settings or purse split settings. Color, MIDI channels, all that sort of stuff that are up here in the purse split settings. So that's a handy shortcut to quickly switch between 2 different sounds or 2 different setups. The next thing is I'll go into the purse split settings and talk about some of the hidden settings there. So the first one is if you hold down the channel per note button, it changes all the other MIDI settings to those that are required for default MPE operation. You know, the 48 bend range of 48 semitones, channel per note, Tabor CC74, etc. The next thing to note is that in the bend range column, you notice it only has printed settings of 2, 3, 12, and 24. Well, if you hold down the 24 button, then you've got the ability to select any bend range from 1 up to 96. Now, it was previously set to 48 because that's the default for MPE, so I'll just leave it there. And as is in the case with these other hidden settings, if you change it from the defaults, the light will change from the default main color light to the default accent color light, which in this case is cyan, light blue. So let's see, the next thing we have is the pitch X column. And in this case, there's a setting that's unmarked, that's just the 5th row from the top, and that's called Reset on Release. Now, normally, LinnStrument resets any pitch bend before sending a new note, right just beforehand, but after you've touched it. But on some synths, this can cause the pitch to swoop down quickly right at the start of a note. And that's because, particularly if you're in MPE mode, if you played a pitch slide and then released it at the end of the pitch slide, the synth will store that bent pitch. So then when you reset it at the beginning, it will quickly swoop down to normal pitch. But what this does is, in those cases, you can turn on reset at release. And what this does is to do that pitch resetting when you release the note. Now, this doesn't work if you have a note that sustains past the end, but if your note does stop by the end, then it will be a good way of correcting that for some synths that would have this slower resetting. And the next column is timbre Y, and the first button, on, if you hold that, this allows you to set the range limits of the output of the messages sent. Normally it is 0 to 127, but you can change it to whatever you want, the high and low, so you can restrict that range. Now also in that timbre Y column is CC74, because you're only given the options of CC1 and CC74. Well, if you hold down CC74, you can change that to any CC number that you want, control change number that you want. And if you go even further past the end, you get polypressure and channel pressure. So you can use those to send y-axis if you choose. Now for the poly pressure, that's particularly interesting because that allows you to send polyphonic y-axis axis over a single MIDI channel, because poly pressure messages are unique per note on one channel. That's the nature of poly pressure. So I'm going to set that back to 74. And now if we go over into the loudness column, it has the same thing in the on button as in timbre Y. If I hold that, I can set my my low and high ranges of the output signal set, output messages sent from pressure messages. So that's L for low, H for high. But if you go even further, you can change from 7-bit pressure to 14-bit pressure, which is handy if you really want to get a whole lot of resolution. Unfortunately, almost no synths support this, but at least LinnStrument does. Let's see, moving further along, we have, in the loudness column, you have CC11 set as your message to be able to send loudness or pressure on. And so if I press that and hold it down once again, I can change it to any CC that I want. The next column is color. In this case, you can set the colors for any of those 4 things. You know about this. But the played button, if I hold that, I get a very large number of selections for how to light cells. Now, by default, it is set to cell, and that just means that whatever you press, it will turn to the color of the played color selection. But if I hold it down and I change that one over to same, then I get all pads of the same pitch lit whenever I play them. And that's kind of handy if you're playing something in the left hand and you want to see where that same note is over here. It's a handy feature to have. But if you go beyond that, you get these animations. For example, this one, cross. Whenever I play a note, it will radiate out. And the radiation, the animation speed, will be controlled by my finger pressure. And there are quite a few of those. There's cross, there is circle, there is square, there's diamond, there is star, and my favorite, which is sparkle. I like it particularly when I change the played color to white. So if I play, for example, a chord here, all those things are circling around. And the animation, once again, speeds up based on my pressure. It's a fun thing. I like it. Moving right along, in the low row, the option of arpeggiator is, most people know that what it does is turn on the arpeggiator when you're playing on the, when you hold it down. Oh, I forgot to take off sparkle. Let's set that back. So normally it would be used to arpeggiate a note. But what you may not know is that if you then slide your thumb up or down, you'll go through all the different arpeggiation rates. Right now it's set to 16th swing. Now it's 16th note triplets, 32nd notes, 32nd note triplets, or back here to straight 16ths, 8th note triplets, 8th notes. So that's a handy thing that's not as obvious as just using your thumb to turn it on. Now there are a couple of other settings here in the, let's see, first of all I've forgotten, let's see, no, that one doesn't do it. If I set it to X equals CC1 and I hold that, it allows me a couple of options. Number one, there are 2 modes, hold and fader. Hold mode is what's normally used. And what that allows you to do is to have sort of a momentary mod wheel using the low row. So if I hold this, I can send mod wheel messages starting at 0, and if I move up to 7 cells to the right, it gives me the full range of the mod wheel. So it's sort of like a momentary mod wheel used for maybe adding some sort of a modulation that you'd like to, right? That's the default. But if I change that to fader, then it just acts as a big long mod wheel and stays wherever you put it. Now the last option here is XYZ equals CC 16 to 18. Now that one offers me the same options of hold and fader, but then it allows me also to change the assignments of X, Y, and Z. They're normally set to CC's, yes, here we go. CC's 16, 17, and 18, but you can change them to anything you want. And including channel pressure and poly pressure, or just channel pressure rather. Okay, so I'll turn that assignment off and go back to normal here. The other thing is the CC faders feature. This is a handy one that allows you to turn one split into 8 horizontal control change faders. And normally they're assigned to control change 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But if you hold down CC faders, you can then select over here which one that you want to adjust and then change it to a different CC, just like that. And all the per split settings, of course, because they're called per split settings, are independent for the left and right splits. So now let's move down to the global settings. The first one is Scale Select. Now, the Scale Select button, which is the third from the bottom in the View column of the Note Lights On-Off section, that allows you to select one of 12 preset note light patterns. The first 9 are used just to select, to turn on and off each and every note within the octave, but the last 3 of these 12 are A sharp, and B, which have no relation to those musical notes or keys, but rather they are just used as assignments of the preset note light patterns. So these 3 on the top, A sharp, and B, are patterns that you can use to write, to create your own custom note light pattern in the Surface. So by default, A is set to guitar dots. And A sharp is set to a very colorful pattern. This is the same as the standard note lights, with the exception that you get a different note for a different color for each note of the scale. So there's 7 different colors being used. And the last one is blank. That's B. So if I use that one, you'll have no lights on at all, but of course whatever you touch will be lit by the played light. However, I'm going to show you how to create your own note light patterns. If I just hold that down, now I'm in painting mode, and this little blinking light tells me what color I'm painting with. So I can set individual notepads, or I can draw them, then I can switch to a different color, and I have this rotating through the 10 available colors. So you can create any pattern you want. And then if you want to erase, just hold your fingers in 2 corners of a rectangle and you'll erase all the notes in between. So that's the custom light patterns. Let's switch back to the normal custom light patterns. So the View column, the button above that is left-handed mode. And what this does is it changes all the lights and the pitches so that the pitches ascend to the left. For example, if you had to turn the thing around and then change the row offset, you could have a different sort of a left-handed standing up guitar tuning, for example. But what's interesting also is what I can do, and let me set this up first. That's set up, that's good. What I can do is hold this down, and it asks me if I want to reverse the entire playing surface, both left and right splits, or just the left or just the right. So let's say, for example, I want to reverse just the left and then turn the split on. Then I've got here pitch rising to the right, to the left rather, and then on this side, oh, I must have something in MIDI off, but at any rate, the pitch goes up to the right on this side. So you can have a mirrored pitch increase so that the scale lights and the pitch direction will be mirrored left to right. Anyway, I'll turn that off for now and change this back, turn it off. So let's see here. Okay, so the row offset, the default or the printed options are +3, 4, 5, 7, and octave and guitar, or no overlap. Well, to make it more flexible, if you hold down the plus octave button, then you can set it to any row offset, in other words, the tuning between the different rows, from -16 to +16. And then if you go one more to the left, you have minus guitar. So it gives you guitar tuning, but inverted, so that the high notes are here and the low notes are here. And I'll set that back and select this again. Okay, so the last one in this section is guitar tuning. If I hold that down, and normally that just gives you guitar tuning in the upper 6 rows and then 2/4 below that. But what I can do now is I can basically tune each row like a string however I wish. So, for example, I have E here at the top, I have B, I have G, and then I can select whatever I want for any of those. Okay, now I'm going to change that back to 4th tuning. There we go. Now for the foot switch assignments, if you hold down the tap tempo button, which is one of the assignments, you get a number of other options. Tap is the obvious one, that's the first one, the default one. But then you get legato mode, you get latch, which is used for the arpeggiator. It'll latch notes so you can take them off and have them still arpeggiate. You have preset increment, preset decrement, which you can assign to foot pedals. It's handy for quick preset changes, sending out to an external synthesizer. They're program change messages. This PCH is pitch. What this does is with a switch, a panel or foot, allows you to turn on or off the ability to send pitch bend messages, which is handy if you're doing guitar style play, because with it off and you slide up, you'll get a different pitch. The slide will be quantized to semitones, whereas if you have pitch on it, it'd be like slide guitar. So it's sort of taking the frets on or off. The next thing is velocity sensitivity. Now in this, I'm going to take this off. Okay, for velocity sensitivity, for the fixed button, what that does is defeats velocity sensitivity, but if you hold that down, now it allows you to select by sliding your finger what you want your fixed velocity to be. The other thing is, if you hold down either high, medium, or low, you can set the range of output velocities that are sent from 1 to 127, just as we did with the timbre and loudness on buttons. Then the next thing is, in pressure sensitivity, there's actually the ability to get finer control of touch sensitivity than the high, medium, low buttons. And what you do is hold down calibration, then press medium. And this is what's called touch sensor prescale. Now, warning, warning, you don't want to change this. But if you really understand it well by reading that section of the panel settings page very well and understand the dangers of it, you can actually change the sensitivity of your sensor. Now, it won't affect how much force is required, the minimum force required to trigger a note, but it will increase the sensitivity or decrease the sensitivity, allowing you for a bit more of a fine tuning. And if you do this, as it tells you in the panel settings page, write down this calibrated value first, because this value is calibrated at the factory with weights. So that's what the ideal setting should be. You want to write it down first. But anyway, once again, read that section of the panel settings page if you want to before doing this. I mean, you should do that if you want to do this. Let's see, moving right along. In the power MIDI column, you have, if you hold down the USB button, you have a number here, and this is a delay that's inserted between each message. Or actually, I think between each byte. In this case, by default, it's 235 microseconds. Microseconds are very, very small measurement of time. But what this is good for is if you're using USB and you have an older computer or an older software synthesizer that gets overloaded by the large volume of expressive data that the instrument sends, you can put these delays between the messages and slow it down a little bit. It won't, MIDI over USB is 4 times as fast as MIDI over the DIN cable. So it does run pretty fast, and that can be a burden, put a burden on some older computers. The next thing here is sleep mode. And this is what we did by pressing these buttons before, but you can also do it by pressing this button. So, but if you hold sleep down, it gives you some options. So sleep is the normal one where it turns all the lights off. But if you move that one to the left, it does store. And now if I press this, it gives me a in-store animation saying LinnStrument in big letters, flashing some colors, and going through this looping animation that's supposed to draw people's attention to the LinnStrument when it's sitting there in the store. Right? So if I take that even further to the right, instead of store, I select Christmas, then I have a Christmas animation. Little Easter egg there. Now if I hold that down, and let's say I had set that to sleep, then if I swipe down, I can determine whether I want it to go into sleep mode whenever I press the sleep button, or after 1 minute of interactivity or 2 minutes of interactivity, the delay of 3 minutes, 4 minutes, etc. So you can have this automatically turn the lights off when you're not using it. But by default, it's off. It never turns the lights off, because actually the lights draw very, very little power. And I think that's almost it. The only thing left is the audience messages. These first 16 buttons along the top row are audience messages, and what that means is they're intended to be viewed by the audience if you're standing up and playing like a guitar or a stick. So they're upside down they're upside down with the intention of being watched by the audience. So if I press, for example, this second button, it says applause, but in a way that is intended to be watched by the audience. So that's it. Those are all the hidden settings. And by the way, if you want to, in the panel settings page for each of the tabs, personal settings, global settings, etc., if you just search the page for the word hidden, you'll find the hidden settings there. But once again, the reason for this is to enlighten you to these hidden settings that you may not have been aware about. Thank you very much.